Well, it is officially summertime. People are firing up the grill. The pool has become the spot for family gatherings. And of course the sun is screaming in pure anger as it fires heat rays upon us, making it impossible to do anything without getting a massive sunburn or possible heat sickness. Also, it's slasher season. And I know, you can watch a slasher movie all year round. I always do. Some people save them for October in order to celebrate Halloween. Again, an appropriate time. But it is hard to deny that many of these movies take place during the hottest season, at some sort of summer camp or summer vacation situation. Mostly this was due to the fact that filmmakers could use these locations for very cheap during the off-season, and thus add a lot of production value for very little, and creating a lot of movies with a summer theme. Movies like Sleepaway Camp, The Burning, or of course many of the Friday the 13th films all fall into this category. So if you're planning a summer slasher viewing party, you've got a lot to choose from. But that said, there was one slasher movie with a summer theme that I had not revisited in many years. And with 4th of July just passing, I thought it'd be a good time to check it out again. And you know what? I was pleasantly surprised with how well it actually held up. And so I thought, let's do an episode on it. So join me. Let's dive into the waters of Southport, North Carolina, into a little film called I Know What You Did Last Summer. I'm Ryan Reed, and this is Fright Films. I Know What You Did Last Summer is a 1997 slasher film directed by Jim Gillespie. It stars Jennifer Love Hewitt, Freddie Prinze Jr., Sarah Michelle Gellar. I guess it was the decade of having 3 names. Well, except for Ryan Phillippe, who also stars in the movie, but his character's name is Barry William Cox, so it counts. The plot revolves around 4 high school friends who have recently graduated and are about to go their separate ways into college. After one night of celebrating, they're involved with a hit-and-run accident, and fearing the repercussions, rather than talking to the police, they decide to dump the guy's body into the water, and then never speak of it again. Well, a year later, they all start getting strange notes telling them that somebody knows what they did last summer, hence the title, and it's up to them to figure out who's stalking and killing them off. The movie is loosely based off a young adult novel from the 70s of the same title. It was written by Lois Duncan, and apparently she was appalled by the fact that they turned her book into a slasher movie. So after hearing that, I was curious what the plot was for the book, and I read the synopsis, and yeah, there are many differences between the two, but the one major one is that in the movie, the teens run over an adult pedestrian crossing the street. In the book, they run over a child on a tricycle. I mean, maybe it's just me, but that seems way darker than anything that's in the movie. Anyway, the first time I saw I Know What You Did Last Summer, I felt like there were a few things that were holding it back from being good. First and foremost being that it falls into that category of 90s slasher films that I like to refer to as the Dawson's Creek Syndrome. Now, what does this mean exactly? Well, in the mid-90s to early 2000s, there was a string of generic slasher films that came out that were influenced by the success of Scream. You see, before then, slasher movies had kind of just died out in the 90s, but Scream brought a modern meta take to the slasher while casting a bunch of TV actors from teen dramas and sitcoms and making a ton of money in the process. So studios started copying it and doing the same thing, throwing budgets of $20 to $30 million at these slasher movies and casting familiar TV faces from shows like Party of Five and Dawson's Creek, hence the Dawson's Creek Syndrome. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but one of the things that was great about the 80s slasher movies was the low-budget nature of them. They were not polished, they were gritty. They often had budgets in the thousands, not in the millions. And most of the actors within the film were just starting to get their big breaks, and so essentially they were nobodies. I mean, sure, you did have a few household horror names like Kelly Maroney or Barbara Crampton, but most of the time these people were cast to play the characters, not because the actors themselves would bring in an audience. Once the 90s slashers started, it was hard to see the actors as anything other than their glossy TV personas. And that doesn't mean that these actors were bad by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, they often do a really great job. But let's be honest, when you see someone like Neve Campbell or Sarah Michelle Gellar on the big screen, it's hard not to think it was a studio note to cast them so they would bring in their built-in TV audience. It went from being, I want to see that new slasher movie, to I want to see that new Freddie Prinze Jr. movie. And for a sub-horror genre that's always been about cheapness and exploitation, this new polished version always felt fake and weird to me. The other problem that I had with the film is that it never really stood out from the bunch of post-Scream slasher movies. I mean, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, Valentine, they all felt like the same movie. And I know, before you say anything, 80s slasher movies were exactly the same. I mean, Friday the 13th, my favorite slasher series of all time, started off as a ripoff of Halloween. But that said, to me there's a difference between low-budget filmmakers using what works versus a studio doing the exact same thing. 80s low-budget slasher movies always felt like they had something to prove in order to make money, so they would throw things in like a more interesting killer or more brutal kills or a twist on the genre, anything to make them stand out. And you know what? If a big studio wanted to release their movies, then that's even better for the low-budget filmmaker. However, in the 90s, once studios started making big-budget versions of these movies, then it just became about let's do exactly what Scream did. I mean, there was nothing that made these movies stand apart from one another at the time. And a good representation of that is these movie posters. Look at the posters for Halloween, Friday the 13th, and A Nightmare on Elm Street. And you know what? Let's throw My Bloody Valentine in there too. They all have distinct artistic differences that make them stand out. Now look at the posters for Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, and Valentine. They're all practically the same. The cast with a figure or an object somewhere on the poster. It just shows the state of the genre at the time. Now, it has been a while since I've seen several of these movies, so maybe they're better than I remember. Also, I don't want you to think that there is anything wrong with you liking these movies. I mean, maybe you saw one of them for the first time with a group of friends on a Saturday night, or maybe you snuck out to watch TV in the middle of the night and you had the lights all turned off so your parents didn't hear and you had the volume turned way down low. So anything. I mean, it's memories like this that make impressions and make us form bonds with movies. So I am not here to belittle anything you like about these movies or say that your opinion is invalid. Please keep watching whatever horror movies you enjoy. I just bring all of this up so that you know when I say I Know What You Did Last Summer is way better than I remember, you understand why. It had been years since I saw this movie, and my expectations were pretty low, but it greatly exceeded them. And so while I was researching the film, I learned some interesting things. Like the script was actually written by Kevin Williamson. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Williamson's work, he was the writer on Scream. When he was offered the opportunity to write a movie that embraced 80s slasher cliches instead of dissecting them, he took that opportunity. And you know what? I have to respect both the film and him for that. He could have taken another meta approach to this script, but he didn't. Instead, he made a true-to-form slasher film. It was just made a decade after the other slasher movies of the genre. And also, interesting enough, Williamson was actually the creator of Dawson's Creek, which makes me putting this in the category of the Dawson's Creek syndrome feel even more fitting. All the actors are pretty good too. Like I said, they're all TV actors, but that also means that none of them really give a bad performance. They all manage to take characters that could be very unlikable and at least give us a reason to see if they survive or not. Except for Ryan Phillippe as Barry. My god, this character has like 2 modes in the movie. He's either a rich jerk or a screaming lunatic. In fact, he's more threatening than the killer at points in the movie. And speaking of the killer, the suspense in the film is actually really well crafted. It's not full of jump scares or fake outs. In fact, you feel the dread when our killer, known as the Fisherman, approaches our characters. And the fact that he messes with them before he starts killing them off makes it even more tense because you're never quite sure who's gonna die and when it's gonna happen. The Fisherman is great too. He creates such an intimidating form wearing all that rain gear and carrying around a giant meat hook that I'm really surprised he hasn't become a more prominent slasher villain. But I think that the reason is, like with most cases with slasher films, is that the character just doesn't have an interesting enough backstory or persona like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees that we can really latch onto him, and so he kind of just gets forgotten. And everything. The killer, the cinematography, the set design of this coastal town, the suspense that is created, everything just adds up to make a really fun film. However, there are still some things in the movie that I think hold it back from being great and just kind of being good instead. And one of those is how truly unlikable the characters are. I mean, I know I just said that the actors at least make you interested in if they survive or not, but they did do a hit and run and then try to dump the body and not tell anybody, and so it's really hard to root for these characters. Even at the end of the movie when they try to sweep that under the rug, it's still like, yeah, but these are really awful people. And unfortunately, most of the deaths in the film are pretty bloodless or shot in a way that you don't really see anything. I've learned that this was a director's choice, but it's a weird one considering making a slasher film with really unlikable characters only to make their deaths really lame is like telling a hilarious joke and building to the end only to change the punchline so that instead of getting a massive laugh, you get a mild chuckle. It's just an odd choice. The other major problem I have with this film is its soundtrack. I mean, in case you didn't know this was a 90s film, they make sure that you know it by having a song from some hit artist or new up-and-coming band play every few minutes. Oh, did we change locations in the movie? Guess it's time for a needle drop. Or are they in a car? Well, I guess they're listening to a radio with a new song from the I Know What You Did Last Summer soundtrack that you can go out and buy after you've seen the movie. It's so annoying. And if there was an actual music score, which I'm guessing there was because a composer named John Debney was credited as such, I didn't hear it because I was too distracted by whatever new Toad the Wet Sprocket song they were playing at the time. The film also has some weird plot holes. Like, there's a character who dies very early in the movie when the killer has no reason to do so. And when I was watching the movie, this definitely felt like a studio note, which is apparently correct because this death was added after some test audience screenings. But now when you watch the movie, it just makes no sense once you know the character's motivation. And there's another part later on in the movie when Jennifer Love Hewitt is driving around, she's heading to a friend's house, and she opens her trunk and sees that there is a dead body and they're covered in like 20 or 30 crabs. And so she runs over to her friend's house, which seems fairly close nearby, grabs her friends, they come out and there's nothing in the trunk. And so you're telling me in the time that she left her car to her friends and they came back, the killer had time to remove the dead body, remove all of those crabs, leave no trace of seawater, no trace of blood, and no trace of any sort of evidence that anything was in her trunk, and he did this all in the middle of the day in suburbia? It just makes no sense. But all of that said, I did really enjoy I Know What You Did Last Summer on this viewing. It is a way more skillful film than I remember it being, so much so that I'm kind of surprised it didn't become a more prominent slasher franchise. They did have one sequel a year later called I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, which is so bad it is an unintentional comedy at times. And then it kind of was just left alone until 2006, when they made a direct-to-video sequel called I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer, which is also apparently awful, but I don't know because I haven't seen it yet. But I will say, the original film is way better than I've given it credit for in the past. So much so that, since the film takes place around the 4th of July, I may have a new holiday tradition. I might just go watch some fireworks every year, and then follow it up with a viewing of I Know What You Did Last Summer. I'm Ryan Reed. Go watch a movie.